Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast. Vic Morren, Neil Smith. The calendar has turned to September, and that means that the 25-26 season is merely 1 month away. And it's also a good time for us to launch another new franchise. And every time we do this and we think of bringing something new to the table under the NHL Wraparound banner, we always want to make these distinctly different from anything else that we are either currently doing or have done previously. And this franchise, Neil, is quite simply a who's who of hockey greatness.
It certainly is, Vic. And the name of this franchise is NHL Wraparound Hall of Fame Edition. And that's because we are going to have a number of Hall of Famers on this franchise. How many? Well, who knows? It could be a lot. It will be a lot. And it'll be interesting because there's nothing more interesting than hearing from legendary people and how they have a life of hockey and of living. And we want to know all about it.
Our very first guest is a true legend. And truth be told, in the coaching circles, you cannot get any higher on the flagpole.
Well, now it gives me the great honor of introducing the first guest ever on NHL Wraparound Hockey Hall of Fame Edition. And that's somebody who's legendary in every sense of the word in hockey, and that's Scotty Bowman, the great coach. Scotty, thank you for doing this. Thank you for coming on. And it really is an honor. I want to tell you a story. Our first NHL Wraparound show was done in January of 24. Oh. And the first guest was Wayne Gretzky. And that was a great honor for him to do that for me. And this is a great honor to have you. And we waited to have you. We wanted you to be number one.
Oh, no, that's good. Thank you.
I want to just ask you, as we get started, I know you grew up in Verdun, and I know that you were bilingual or are bilingual, but was that in your home? Did you have a French parent, or were your parents English? And who taught you the French?
No, my parents actually, Neil, they came over my dad came first. My dad was a blacksmith in Scotland, and things were not doing very well over there. And he got an offer to come to Canada with the CNR Railway, because they still had horses just before the cars really hit the market. So he came over with three other friends, and oddly enough, Neil, they gave them free ship passage on the Canard line. He came over. He was still single. He was 25. He had gone with my mother because my mother's father, my grandfather, owned a blacksmith shop. And my dad worked there 2 years as an apprentice. He started working when he was about 15. But then he moved around, and it was getting tired of, they were starting to close up. They were a little bit ahead of the horses. They weren't using the horses as much as they were when he first started. So he took the offer, and he was supposed to go to Winnipeg. And two of them, as soon as they got off the ship in Montreal, they got off a 7-day trip over, and they had no money, any of them. And the offer was anybody that doesn't want to take the train and go 2.5 days or 3 days to Winnipeg, they can start work tomorrow morning. So he and a friend of his did stay, and the other two other guys, I never heard about them again. But the other man I didn't know because he stayed in Montreal, and that's how my dad got started. My mother came over and a year later, and they got married in Montreal in 1930. And my sister was born a year before. I was born in 33, and my sister was born in September of 32. So that's how we started to live in Montreal. And, living in Verdun was a suburb of Montreal, and it was a nice sports place. I had a younger brother. Well, you know Jack. Jack was born in 1936. He was 3 years younger than me. And then a younger brother was born 10 years later. But we lived in a flat. We lived in a flat with owned by a French Canadian. My dad was always, Neil, he always believed that never get into credit. If you can't buy something with cash, you don't buy it. But the French people were a little smarter. I lived in a sixplex and 2 in the bottom, 4 up top. And we got along. It was 850 square feet. And we lived there till I was 16 years of age. But I keep thinking back to my past. And I said, well, the reason that I liked sports is that there was no room to stay in the house. We slept and we had our meals there. But as soon as we had to get out, we were on the street doing whatever we had to do. But that was the story of my break-in with Verdun.
And how did you just naturally learn French? Is that?
Yeah, the landlord next door had 2 boys, Denny and Marcel Leroux, and we played with each other on the street, different hockey and in the summer ball, and so we kind of mixed around. I would say when I was there, because I had a paper route, and 60% of my customers, 60% of the people that lived on our street, and there was there was 17 flats with 6 in each flat on one street, and it was 60% were English, 40% were French. So we coexisted, and I didn't have to speak a lot of French, but when I really learned my French was when I got my first chance to go with coaching after I was working in a paint company after I got injured, and then I coached the junior B team when I was 19 or 20. And Sam Pollock brought me to Ottawa. And when I got to Ottawa, it was all the best French-Canadian players from Quebec. And, Claude Drouel was one. He lost an eye. Gilles Tremblay, Bobby Rousseau, Jean-Claude Tremblay. We had about 5 or 6 that made the Canadiens in the next decade. But they couldn't speak English. And I had a little bit of French. So we sort of got together, and I would speak, some English to them, and they would speak some French to me. And so then I was pretty bilingual by the time I went back to Montreal. I didn't speak French in St. Louis for 4 years, but I still, once you get it in your system, you're going to be able to speak it,
So, Scotty, we had Paul Maurice on the show and had a great talk with him. It was actually on the trade deadline, and Vic and I said to him, you shouldn't be doing this on the trade deadline. He said, oh, it doesn't matter. He says, I'll have already had my meetings. Wouldn't you know it? He had to put a big pause on during our interview. And that's when they traded for Marchand was right then. Yeah. So it was funny, but I wanted to ask you one other thing. So you must have been a Canadiens fan when you were a kid, were you?
Well, I was a Boston fan, Neil. My dad was a soccer player in Scotland. When he got into Montreal, there was 2 teams in Montreal in the 30s, and he didn't have much interest in hockey, but he did, because he was English, he kind of supported the Montreal Maroons. And they kind of, I don't know the history of it because I was only 2 years old, but they won the Stanley Cup in 1935, and then 2 or 3 years later they folded. But the only time that they could draw people in Montreal was when they played Canadiens. And the Canadiens were the French team, and Maroons were the English team. But somehow the French supported the Canadiens more than the English supported the Maroons. I guess just too much. I mean, there was a lot of hockey for a city just starting in the NHL. So my dad, what happened is I was only in just starting school in the late 30s, and Boston Bruins games came in just as clear as the local radio. And they had good teams in the 30s, and they had the Kraut line. They had Dick Clapper, they had Eddie Shore. They were winning cups. They should have won a few more actually, but they won 3 or 4. And then I listened to the games on the radio, and my dad would let me listen to the end of the first. The game started 8:30 in those days, so at the end of the first period, my dad he knew I wanted to listen to the game, but I went to bed, forgot to go to school, and then my dad would write down when I woke up in the morning. I had the final score, and they had all the goal scorers. So, but he became interested in hockey, but he never played hockey. And in fact, Neil, just a quick sidebar to his job, is when he got older, and he still followed a lot of hockey in his 80s, and then because he was born in 1900, and the Winnipeg Jets the first year won 12 games. I think they lost 60 or whatever they played. And I used to call him the next day with different scores. And he always said to me, "Don't you ever make fun of Winnipeg. You could have been there." So I thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, that's where my mom is from, or was from, is Winnipeg.
He didn't go there, but he stayed in cold weather. He lived all his life in Montreal. Never learned a word of French.
Wow.
Like a typical English person in the 40s and 50s and 60s. The English lived on their own. As I said, we were 60-40 in Verdun. We never had any issues. My dad, he ran into a tough time around 1939, just as the war was starting in Canada. For Canada, he lost his job with the railway. He had to get into something else, and the city of Verdun was building the Verdun Auditorium, and they offered people that weren't employed, and he was unemployed at the time. He was a good laborer. He knew how to do woodwork. He knew how to do plastering. He was very handy. Electricity, he could do it all. So he worked on the roof at the Verdun Auditorium in 1939, and that's when they built that rink. And then, of course, 3 or 4 years ago, they put our name on it. Denny Savard and myself, we shared our names on because they built an annex, and he died before that, but my dad worked on that rink before it was even opened.
Wow, that's an amazing story. So, Scotty, you started. I know when you started, when you finished playing was because of your injury, and then you went into coaching and assistant coach. Then you won the Memorial Cup. A very successful junior career in coaching, and then of course went to the Blues. And of course went to the finals with the Blues the first 2 years they were in the league. But this is my question is, so this Montreal kid who grew up in Verdun. So
I played midget for Verdun Canadiens. That was a farm team of the junior. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So what my question is, when you got told that you were they were hiring you to be the coach of the Montreal Canadiens, the famous Montreal Canadiens that you grew up with. What was the feeling like that you had? Because to coach your hometown team must have been something very, very special.
Well, Neil, like when I started to coach in the Junior B League, it was an independent team. And then I got an offer. I was working at the paint company. I was on the way to probably be a paint salesman because I could speak the language, and I only worked there 2 years. And Sam Pollock, he was the reason that I really got started in hockey, because he coached when I got injured, and then he moved up the ladder with the Canadiens, and he called me up one summer, and Neil, I can tell stories about him till tomorrow, but he was such a wizard at business and hockey, and he trusted people that worked for him. So he offered me the job to come to Ottawa, and I was only 23 at the time, and he said, "You want to learn the business? There's only going to be the two of us." We sold ads in the program. We had to get all the room. In those days they didn't have condos like these guys, and they're juniors too. So we had to get room and board and school. So I learned it from the ground up, and he being the boss, he kind of let me do all the legwork on that kind of stuff. So that was a big asset for me. And then he moved up the ladder with the Canadiens. He started with them in 1947 because he was running a ball team, and a lot of the Canadian players played softball in Montreal, and he was still young. He was only about 20-something. And then all of a sudden they gave him a job with the Canadiens, just starting. He coached first, and then he moved up the ladder, and the late Frank Selke was the manager of the Canadiens. He came from Toronto in 1946, and Sam Pollock was one of his first hires. And then he worked his way up. And actually, Neil, he probably should have been the manager in the 50s and early 60s. But, Frank Selke was a very healthy man. He had good people working for him. He was the general manager. But Sam Pollock and a man named Ken Reardon, they ran the organization. They found the players. They didn't sign the players. So Selke always did that. So I was lucky that I got hooked up with Montreal just as they started to win their 5 in a row. And I had nothing to do with those teams, coaching junior and then going to Peterborough. And, in those days, Neil, I coached the junior Canadiens, and then we lost the first year and won the second. And then I went to Peterborough. I had a very good team. I inherited a very older junior team from a wonderful man named Ted Kennedy, who was one of the top Toronto Maple Leafs of all time. Yep. And yep. Ted was a good man. He came in and helped me, even though he wasn't coaching. After he decided he wanted to just stay in the trucking business, which he was in. And we got to the finals. We got beat by Winnipeg in 1959. We had to rebuild the team. I coached 2 more years, and then all of a sudden the Canadiens called me up and said, the Sam Pollock again. He said, "Don't be signing any leases in Peterborough," because he said we just lost our head scout, Lou Passador, and you would know.
Oh yeah, I knew Lou. I scouted with Lou.
So Lou went to the Rangers. Emil Francis picked him off, and he was quite a scout for Montreal. He had all of Eastern Canada. He actually had from, I think he even went as far as Winnipeg. He had all the way Fort William, and that's where he came from. So he said, Sam Pollock said, you're not going to coach anymore. And in those days, you didn't have an opinion. And I said, well, I'm kind of disappointed. Well, he said, no, it's going to be good for you. You're going to go travel all through the North Country, Quebec and Ontario. We need to get young players on our junior teams. And Neil, that was a wonderful job for a while. But I was single. I was in my late 20s. All my friends were enjoying the way a 28, 29-year-old would be. And then all of a sudden, I'm in my car driving up to Kirkland Lake and Noranda, and and even in the summer running camps. And it was so. I was lucky though. I did have enough. I did it for 3 years. I was working in Cliff Fletcher was working with Montreal at the time. He wasn't full time. He was working for a iron ore company in the office, but he was doing all the clerical work of all the kids that they would bring in to play junior. And I scouted them, and Cliff was the one that had to line them up with boarding houses and school. And he did all the business part. And he also started in the hockey part. That's how he became, I brought him to St. Louis. So anyways, that was the way I got started. And I mean, when you train under a man like Sam Pollock, Neil, I mean, he was the manager officially from 1964 to he left in 78 because the 2 Brofman brothers bought the Canadiens from the Molson family in 1970, and they kept it for about 10 years. I was there for 1 year of the Molsons, and then the Brofmans took over. And Sam Pollock was so bright a businessman that they said, we like the Canadiens, but they're like a toy for us. They owned banks, they owned a lot of mining companies. They were so big. I mean, even now his name is on the place in the Brookfield Place in Toronto next to the Hall of Fame. And Sam's son is nearly a billionaire because he got in with those right people. And Sam left hockey all of a sudden, 78, said, I'm going to leave the team. We had won 3 in a row. We won another one, but it wasn't because we lost him, but all the same players. And then he became I don't know if you knew about this, Neil. I think you might have. But, he was big. They owned part of Labatt's brewery, and Labatt's owned the Blue Jays. And Sam was involved with the Blue Jays when they won those championships in the 90s. But Sam Pollock was way ahead of his game. You know, Neil, he didn't bother with the other managers. He made the deals with all the owners. But
Scotty, one quick one for you. I've always thought, and I love Jim Gregory. I do. He was a wonderful guy. I love Jim Gregory. But honestly, I always thought there should be, if there was going to be a GM award, it should have been called the Sam Pollock Trophy, because Sam Pollock, to me, was the greatest GM ever.
Right. Yeah, he rebuilt the Canadiens because they won the 5 in a row. They won the regular season in year 6. They finished first overall, and then all of a sudden Chicago had the big upset. They won the cup in '61, and then Canadiens started to make trades. They traded Jacques Blount. They traded Doug Harvey, and they kind of slumped for about the next 4 years. Toronto won those 3 in a row, 62, 63. But Punch Imlach came in, and Punch did a great job, and they had veteran players. And then they put Sam in as the manager in '64. And except for the big loss in '67, which was a big upset, Toronto won their last cup in '67. But Sam won in his first year, 1965, 66 he won, lost in '67, and won again in '68 and '69. And so, you know, he was a manager for 13 years. And don't forget, like, same as when I was with most of my career, I was before the salary cap. So I never fool people. I know, I mean, how fortunate could you not be to go to Detroit when you had a Mike Ilitch spending the money that he did? I mean, you know, people think that's what it is, but I never got involved in the cap era, which we know, and you know, Neil, from being in hockey, cap era is totally different than we had before. But Sam Pollock won 8 cups as a manager in 13 seasons.
Wow.
And he rebuilt those teams all the time. He was always trading. He's one of the first guy, like when the expansion came in '67, he had foresight. He had a lot of extra players, and he would make deals like with Jack Kent Cooke and guys like that. He would give them 2 or 3 regular average players, and he would take their first pick all the time. And, you know, and Jack Kent Cooke, I interviewed for LA a long time ago, but I knew it wasn't going to work because I'm glad I didn't go there, but before I went back to Montreal. But he wanted to trade. Jack Kent Cooke wanted to trade draft picks for the next 3 or 4 years and get 3 or 4 NHL players. And I interviewed with him, and I said, Mr. Cooke, it's not going to work. You're never going to get to the very top. You're never going to get those players that you need to win with. You're going to get good players. You're going to stay ahead of maybe your own division, but you're not going to be close. And that's what happened. Like Sam, you know, people don't realize, like, even Boston Bruins, they got onto it. Harry got onto it. He was smart. They traded Skip Craik to Los Angeles for their first pick. The pick became Ray Bourque. I mean, you know, if you look at all those trades, if somebody went to the expansion years of, say, 68, 69, 70, and they looked at the teams that traded their draft picks to get some, you know, players that were going to play in the league, but they weren't going to be stars.
Well, the Lafleur deal also.
Pardon?
The deal to get the first pick that ended up being Guy Lafleur.
Yeah, well, that was the big one they got. Yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of, and I don't know how he did it, because we had the big reunion in Montreal, and, like, you know, we had players from Montreal and Philadelphia and Boston, you know, and everybody else. But Steve Shutt was drafted in '72, number 3rd pick. So we know the 3rd pick wasn't Montreal's pick. It had to come from a team that was 3rd worst. And then the next year, that was a big credit to Claude Ruel, because he picked a player that a lot of people wouldn't have picked. On the 8th pick, he picked Bob Gainey. But still, the 8th pick out of whatever team there was, that was a team that was going to be out of the. See, that was another pick that Pollock was able to trade earlier for. You know, so he knew the business part of the game, and you know, he was. I mean, I didn't mind him. He was tough to work for, but that's the way you have to be. You can't be soft, you know.
Scotty, a couple of coaching questions for me. And you see the game through the lens of really 7 decades of coaching. And even though the players now bigger, faster, stronger, is the game still fundamentally the same now as it was then?
I think, you know, it's not the same because, you know, like I don't go to as many as I went to 5 years ago, but I still follow it. In fact, I just went to a Buffalo Sabre. They had a reunion for some people, and like I think this is what I was going to mention before. But when you mentioned Paul Maurice, and I was talking to Rick Dudley, and Rick had played for me. I got him out of he played for Buffalo before I got there, and then he went to Cincinnati in the World Hockey, and we signed him back. And he was a pretty useful player for Buffalo. Yep. After we got him back, he got 30 goals one year. But then he became a scout. He's been with 2 or 3 organizations. But, you know, he was telling me, like he said, like Bill Zito, he's got, I said, well, who do you report to? He said, I really don't report to anybody. They let me go wherever I want to go to find players. Mm-hmm. Paul Fenton is another guy that sits beside me when I go to the games in Tampa. He lives in Sarasota, and he was, you know, he worked his way up Nashville. I think he was the manager in Minnesota, not for long. And then also Les Jackson. That was the kind of people that Bill Zito picked up. And, you know, I was talking to him about the team, but wondering how you're not going to lose much because, you know, you've been able to keep players and, you know, you use the salary cap and everything. And he said, well, you know, Bill Zito works very closely, and he wants to give Paul Maurice players that he wants. Mm-hmm. He said Paul Maurice likes a certain type of player. He doesn't like players that are soft. He doesn't like players, if he has a choice to get size and strength and physicality, that's he'll mingle them around. But he said, like Bill Zito. So I think nowadays there's kind of like a boilerplate team, and, you know, I think it's going to be anxious to see now, like all these teams that we know are rebuilding and have been trying to rebuild: Montreal, Buffalo, Ottawa, Detroit. Now, and Chicago. You got to throw them in too because they're just taking young players all the time. But, you know, Neil, you ran teams, and you did it with the Rangers. Like you had a pretty good nucleus, but if you wouldn't have made those trades with Edmonton to get those Tikkanens and McTavish and all those good players, and, you know, maybe they weren't as good as they were when they were in their prime, but, you know, that's the thing I think now is that those other teams, they have good players, good draft picks, but they don't have a core. And how long is it going to take to develop a core? I don't know, because I keep looking at I was mentioning it to Rick. I said, you know, when I look at your team, and I know Ekblad was the number 1 pick. It's 11 years ago, and Barkov was a great pick by Dale Talon in that draft. Not many people would have maybe put him where he was, but I said, you know, you got Barkov, you got Lundell. They're both draft picks. You got Ekblad, but, you know, a lot of your other players are players that you guys, Luosterainen and Mikkola and all these they're pretty big guys they picked off from other teams. And the trade to get Bennett. Then you mentioned the trade to get Marchand. You know, I don't think there's a formula. Like Chicago's thing might work in time. It's been 4 years now that they've been right at the very bottom. It looks this year like that they're going for another bottom pick. The crowds are okay, I guess, and they sold it on the idea. But Neil, you know from being in the league so long, it's pretty hard just to be a one-track mind, isn't it? You get players, certain kind of players. You got to, you know, I think you got to look at what these teams have done that are in the mix all the time.
Well, Scotty, and then I'll let Vic continue. But Scotty, I just want to say to you that Vic and I have talked about this, and I said, I don't know how San Jose and Chicago are going to do this because I understand rebuilding, but you can't strip it right down to the girders. Mm-hmm. I mean, you want to renovate a building, but you can't strip everything away and then start all over with, and like it's going to take you a million years to get there. And I agree with you.
You're right, because you're competing, because Ottawa and Montreal and Detroit got young players, and so does Anaheim, so does New Jersey. I mean, there's Neil, we could pick 7 or 8 teams in the league that we like a lot of their players, their drafts, but they're still trying to get in the playoffs. Most of them, it's that's the thing. You asked me about the league. It's really tough now when you think of it. 32 teams, 16 in, and people are so happy. 16 unhappy. I mean, it's probably not. I mean, Neil, even in baseball now, they got the 3 wild. They got the first 3 winners. Then they got the wild. Like, the Yankees are battling for the wild card with Boston Red Sox, and then you got Seattle is in the mix. Maybe Kansas City is a little bit off, but I think in hockey we probably have to have more teams in the mix, don't you?
Yeah, no? Because you got half at the end of the year. Half your fans are happy and half are pissed off. Half the league's fans are pissed off because, who wants to spend the kind of money you got to spend now to go to the games when your team has no shot whatsoever?
Yeah, the team that'll be interesting to see what type of system they'll do is Pittsburgh. Yeah. They still got the 3 veterans. They've lost a lot of they don't. I mean, it's not easy to. When you're trying to win, you're going to try to move guys out, and sure, players are going to be good players eventually. But I'm anxious to see what they do with their lineup, and how do you? It must be tough when you have a team that was contending and winning back-to-back cups, not less than 10 years ago.
It's just interesting to listen to both you and Neil talk about the evolution and how teams are constructed and how they approach the game differently now than maybe they did back then. But also, when you started looking at systems, I know that you took a lot from Anatoly Tarasov and the Russian systems, and eventually you brought in the Russian 5 in 1995 with Sergei Fedorov, Igor Larionov, Slava Kozlov, Slava Fetisov, and Vladimir Konstantinov. And can you share with our listeners how you have seen the influence of European hockey through the decades infiltrate itself into the North American systems?
Well, yeah, Neil was part of it too, because, there's sometimes you got to take a gamble. And I remember I wasn't with them. I was probably still maybe I wasn't even on TV or something. But when they started picking off Konstantinovs and Fedorov and these guys, and they had a good Neil had that good scout Krister Rockstrom, is it?
Yeah.
They got Lidstrom. But you got to gamble, and they gambled that they could get those guys out, and they did. And look at the players they got because of that. But when I got there, they had 3 players from the Soviet Union. They had Fedorov had been there 1 year, and he was an unusual player because he was so good defensively. When he first hit the NHL, Brian Murray used him in a like a checking role because he was that good at it. Most Russians in those years weren't checkers; they were offensive players, and the Russian system was, we're going to play defense with the puck and we're going to keep it, and you're not going to get it off us. And that was a good thing, and they did. But Konstantinov was a late pick, but what a player he would have been, and was for the brief time that he played, 4 or 5 years. But we had 3. Kozlov was a boy that got injured over in Russia in a car accident. Somehow they snuck him into North America. I got there in '93, and he started the season with Adirondack, scored about 6 goals his first week, and we said, this guy's too good for that league. And then when we were really lucky because I had a good relationship with Lou Lamoriello, because when I went to Buffalo in the 80s, Lou was running the Providence University, and I don't know if Neil experienced like I did, but every player that graduated from that school, he became his first contract agent. And Lou always did the contracts. We had a kid, Gates Orlando. It's one that we kind of mishandled. He should have been playing in the NHL, but I made a deal with Lou and we signed him. I mean, the deals were always what everybody else was, but we got him. I had a good relationship with him. I phoned him up and I said, we need a depth defenseman. You got a guy sitting in the stands. He's probably your number 7 or 8 now, Slava Fetisov. And he said, Slava's a good friend of mine. We got a hell of a team. I'd like to see him go somewhere. He said, are you going to use him? I said, well, I mean, I can't put him on the first 2 pairs, but I said, we're going to play him. I'm going to try him. And so he gave us a good chance to get a player like that. And then once we got Fetisov, he was the 4th one. And that summer, he called me a couple of times and he said, Scotty, Larionov wants to come to Detroit. He's my best friend. I played with him all my career. And he said, he kind of beat you guys in 93. I said, he sure did. He had a whole 5-man unit. They weren't Russians, but they were good. And he said, well, they would trade him. I'm pretty sure because he's already talked to the manager about it. And I remember calling up to them and I said, would you try to trade a centerman? We got lots of them, he said, but I need scoring. So we had a guy, Ray Shepard, he scored 40 goals. And that was the piece of the puzzle that we needed. And I think having those 5 guys was probably similar, Neil, when you won the Cup and had those Lowe's and McTavish. How many did you have from the Rangers? About 4 or 5?
From the Oilers, we had, I think we had at least 5. I mean, we started with Messier and Graves for the first 2. Then we added Boom. Then we added Tikkanen. And then we added Kevin Lowe. And then McTavish. And then Glenn Anderson. So there were 7.
Wow. Isn't it amazing that you got all those players and look what they did? I mean, they're not going to do it forever, but that's the way the Russian 5 was. I mean, they changed the game for us, and I could see how good they were. I was always worried. I was so worried that somebody's going to try to figure them out. And I remember I went to Slava one day. He's always a pretty communicative guy. And I said, he said to me, I know you're trying to run a team, and we like to play together. But if there's something that you don't like, you got to tell me because I can work it with Igor. I mean, don't be shy. And I said, Slava, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I couldn't figure them out. But once you get that core, and that's what we're getting at off the track of it. But I don't know how these teams, Neil, they get these players that are drafted maybe between 1 and 8. They're players that feel that they got everything made already. It must be tough to get these young players now for a coach, and because they feel that they've got the answer to. They're entitled. They're entitled to the power play. They're entitled to play regular.
But Scotty, that runs throughout all business now with this age group of young people. So the entitlement that the hockey players feel is the same entitlement that the Wall Street guys feel, and the same entitlement that all across the board. It's whatever they're calling this generation. Nobody wants to work, and everybody wants to start at 200,000, and it's crazy. But Vic, I'm sorry I interrupted your question line.
No, it's perfectly fine. I'm learning from you guys, so it's all good. Scotty, you have coached Hall of Famers throughout your career, and starting in Montreal with a host of Hall of Famers with the Canadiens, starting with Guy Lafleur. You coached Gilles Perreault in Buffalo, Lemieux and Yager in Pittsburgh, and Yzerman, Hasek, Robitaille, Chelios, Brett Hull in Detroit. And now you look at the superstars of today, McDavid, Kucherov, Crosby, McKinnon. Do you think there's a different methodology to coaching superstars now than they were when you were coaching?
It must be because there's much more, I did talk to a couple of veteran coaches that I knew, and they were telling me that everything's so different now. The players get on the bus after the game. They're on their phones. Not all of them, some of them. They're talking to their agents. They're talking to their, their confidants that people, they're not very happy with different things. But the only thing it must be still the same communication. The coach, I didn't want to sugarcoat things with any player. I tried to tell them right from the get-go that you got a hang of a chance to win an individual trophy, but I'm not here to win an individual trophy for a player. I'll try to put you in a position that you'll succeed. I'll try to use you at the right place at the right time and give you a chance. If you're a great player and you're gunning for a scoring championship, I realize it. But at the same time, I'm going to tell you the truth. And sometimes the truth is not going to be what you want to hear. So I never tried to fool a player, no matter who it was. I tried to tell it like it was, because I believe that if whatever I was telling them, I believe that that's the way it should be done. So I never, I didn't second guess or try to say, I gotta get this player and I gotta make sure. There were some players that you had to stroke a little more than others. There's no question about that, but not to the point that you can let them run wild on whatever ideas they have. You got to. It's not an easy chat. I think it's a lot different now for the players because they come loaded with contracts. They come loaded with independence. I think as time goes on, though, and you'll see it happen. You'll see it. Players like to win. I mean, they're not like as if they're not making a lot of money. They're all making a lot of money. Some making more than others, but they still want to win. And I think that must be the toughest part for some of these teams that haven't won for a while. I'm living right here in Buffalo, and they're having a tough time selling tickets right now. And this is a crucial year for them. They've gone 13 years without making the playoffs, and the interest is very slim right now in the hockey because they have a football team that's been close. It hasn't won yet, but it's not a big city, but it's a big Buffalo Bills city. And the hockey players that come here, there are a lot that stay and they enjoy living here. They meet Buffalo girls and families and they stay here. But at the same time, they're not playing anymore. And I think that's one thing about Buffalo. They've got to figure a way. Not many players, they got to really make sure that it's a nice place to live. It's not that bad. It's comfortable for the families. If you want to have a family and bring up your kids and things like that, it's not that bad. But at the same time, the image is terrible. It must be tough for these places, And I mean, I don't know how they can change it, but they're gonna try.
I wanted to follow up on the superstar question because you had mentioned it's all about winning. And the two superstars I want to talk about in particular that you coached was Guy Lafleur was a guy that maybe you needed to adjust to a little bit in terms of his style and his need to freelance a little bit. But Steve Yzerman was a player that you had to get him to buy more into the team concept that he might have to sacrifice a little offense in order to get the Stanley Cup championship that had eluded him.
Well, Lafleur had a tough start. Number one, he ran the Quebec League for a couple of years. His idol was Jean Beliveau. He had just retired. People were ordaining him that he's going to be the next Beliveau, and that wasn't going to happen to anybody. So he came into a team, and he was a centerman, young guy, young centers, and the league was full of guys. They had, Rattel, and they had Clark, and they had Esposito, and these kind of guys. And, they'll pick your pockets, those older guys all the time. So we had to sort of tolerate him for a while and then eventually move him to the wing. And that wasn't easy because we had pretty good wingers like Cornway was a big scorer. Yep. And it was tough because people were comparing him to other players that got drafted. and there's a lot of big comparisons. I mean, the guy was a great player, Marcel Dion. He got drafted by Detroit, and he got right away playing. But Lafleur was on a better team, and it was slow getting to where he wanted to be. But once he got, I mean, we tried to make sure he didn't get taken over by checkers and all that kind of stuff. So I think it helped him in the long run. The slow start might have helped him because he didn't have as much focus on him as some of these young guys do. And Yzerman, well, what happened to Steve is he became an offensive weapon for Detroit, but for 10 years being the captain, getting knocked out every year, I don't care how much money they make, and I don't care what it looks like. When you're in hockey and you lose that last game and get knocked out and you don't even get in the playoffs some years, it's not an easy job. And so, I mean, I looked at the team and I liked a lot of the players, but they weren't going to go and play defensive in the playoffs. I mean, they weren't going to be able to score 6-7 goals to win a game. I just told them like it was. I said, it's not going to be easy for you because you're not going to score 60 goals. You're not going to get 150 points. Yeah. You'd still get maybe 30 or 40. But I think the team will be able to be a lot better for you. And, I mean, he had to want to do it too. And he was that kind of a player. But it's nice to see a player like that take the rope and, pull it and become a checker, become a blocker, become a face-off guy. Because, I mean, those are things that skilled players can learn and do. Not every player can put the puck in the net or make plays like those guys can. We know that. But at the same time, you got to lay it on the line, and I think that's what Lafleur, he never complained. I got to say one thing with him, I felt kind of a part of him the first 2 years when he could, looking for 40 goals, he get 25, 28 goals. But I tried to put him later on. I mean, I didn't care who I played him against, but at the beginning, you got to be careful who you play him against.
Last one from me. You were the head coach for one of 5 teams to win at least 3 consecutive Stanley Cups, what they call a dynasty now. There have been 4 clubs that have had that opportunity since the Islanders club wrapped up their dynasty in 1983. You coached one of those in Pittsburgh in 1993, where club had won with Bob Johnson in 91. You won in 92 against Chicago and Mike Keenan. And in 93, the team went 17-0-1 to finish the regular season, took out the Devils in 5, and then you lost to the Islanders in that 7-game series. So you have seen this from both sides. Mm-hmm. As the Florida Panthers go for that three-peat this year, where do you see the line in the sand being drawn between whether they reach that goal or they fall short?
Well, I think last year, after winning the first year, there's no question that they made 2 great moves when they needed to. They augmented their defense with Seth Jones, a player that a lot of people wondered, is he a winner? Can he jump up to the bar and play at the high level, which he did? And then getting Marchand, look what he did to this team. I mean, it was amazing. So they've done it before. So I wouldn't discount the fact they're gonna play a season without maybe Tkachuk. He's a wonderful player that he's probably going to miss, at least according to reports, he's going to miss maybe 4 months, 5 months. But at the same time, they've gone out and they've tried to keep most of their players from last year, and they've added a couple. They always add players that have a little bit of sandpaper, and I think a lot will depend for me on this team is how they handle the goaltending, because they are a team during the season. It's 82 games. Bobrovsky's a great playoff goalie, and he's 37 coming up. During the season, a team like that, there's some games they're not going to play very well, and the other team's going to win. But at the same time, you look at their division. I mean, I don't think the Lightning are going to fade away. I don't know how strong they can bounce back. Boston's a team that is changing their lineup. Toronto is not going to be a lot different. I mean, they got enough players to be a pretty good team. And that division, they got to make sure that they don't put their foot off the pedal early in the season, because that's the toughest part. When you win the Stanley Cup, and Neil knows it, they celebrate now. They like there's all kinds of weddings, there's all kinds of celebrations, and but at the same time you got to play those teams, and they're going to play those Ottawas, they're going to play Detroits, they're going to play the good Montreal teams that are getting better. So you got to really make sure. I think that they got a pretty good shot at it, but they'll have to add like they did before. They'll have to add at the right time, and I think the reason they added last year is they knew going in they were the third. They were the third best team in their division, and by the time the playoffs started, they were well ahead of the other teams.
Scotty, I'm going to end this with a couple of personal questions that are fun, because
Sure.
you and I worked with a couple of guys that I only had 4 coaches in New York in 11 years. And 2 of my coaches you worked with. And Roger Neilson, I hired him in 1989. I was 35 years old. I was scared out of my mind. Luckily, I hired Roger because Roger came in as a veteran and an older guy. And he put together the whole thing for me. Like, I mean, he didn't do the manager's job, but training camp and travel and all kinds of things that I didn't know as chief scout of Detroit, what the hell to do. So Roger was also, as you know, a really good person and could, so tell me when you had Roger, I know, in Buffalo, and you knew Roger his whole life. You and Roger were both in Peterborough at one time. I don't mean together, but you're both Peterborough Pete's coaches. And Roger was a pioneer in, bringing video into things. They called him Captain Video. And I can't say enough about him and my time with him. In fact, quick story, Scotty, when it came time that, I had to let him go because the team wasn't winning and I had to do something. It was year 3, and I went into his office, and he was at Rye, and I went into his office and I told myself, do not cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. As soon as I walked in, I started crying. And he knew right then that it was over, but that's how I felt about him. I honestly, I can admit it, I was bawling my eyes out.
Well, the year they called me in and said I wasn't going to coach anymore, for the time being, in 1961, I started, and they said, you got a territory in northern Quebec, and we got the city of Montreal. You don't have to worry about that. But I used to take my car, and first thing I ever did, I drove my car in October to Toronto, took my room at the King Edward Hotel for a month, and somehow Roger was coaching a team called Bix Pickles, a midget team, and I went down to see the team play. That's when I first met him. And then I got so enthused, talking hockey with him, that I said, "Would you mind being a bird dog and a scout for my team?" And they said, "No, go ahead." He said, "I'm coaching," but he said, "I want to tell you, I won't be able to scout a lot of games." But he said, "I got a nice team here. I coached some baseball in the summer. Some of the guys are still playing hockey for me, many of them." And then he said, "I also have another job." He said, "I'm coaching a junior B team in Aurora." I said, "Oh my God, how do you do that?" He said, "Well, I work it out, And then he said, "I'm pretty busy. I'm still a gym teacher at this high school in Toronto." And then he said to me, I'm a distributor of the Globe and Mail. I've got over 500 papers, but I got people on my teams that are delivering the papers. I don't deliver the papers." I said, "Oh, you're a busy guy." I said, "You think you could do something for us in Montreal?" "Oh, sure." He said, I got lots of time on my hand. I could only talk to him. I want to talk about players in the Toronto Hockey League, the midgets especially. And he used to be home between 7:30 and 7:45. His mother would answer the phone, and I had a 15-minute window. And if I didn't talk to him in that 15-minute window, he would probably not be available till 11:30 or 12 at night, because he never went to sleep in a bed. He always catnapped. I always used to get him. He'd sleep 2 hours. He'd get up, and that's how he would do his video. And oh my God, and the last story I'm going to tell you about him, one game in the playoffs that year, he called me up and he said, it's going to be a tight squeeze. I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to have to stay. I'm going to have to stay with my midget team because they're in the playoffs. But he said, is there any way that I could give you a recording that you could bring? Are you going to go to the junior game in Aurora? I said, well, yeah. I mean, those guys are more closer to playing junior. He said, well, come to the game in Toronto and see me before the game, and I'll give you a recording. Give it to the trainer. I've already talked to him, and he'll play my pep talk to the team in Aurora before the game. I said, my goodness, I couldn't believe. And sure enough, he coached 2 teams, and then we got to Buffalo, and I wanted to keep him, but Harry Neil and people in Vancouver, Buffalo, we couldn't really give him the contract that they did, and then we lost him. I was really disappointed that he left us because I think he would have been a great coach for the Sabres. He knew hockey, he worked hard, and I don't think there's a player, Neil, that ever played for Roger Neilson that couldn't say he didn't make me a lot better. And you can't beat that. Yeah. Wonderful man.
Yeah, I miss him so much. And but the next name I don't miss. And I said I miss Roger Neilson, but the next name I'm going to throw at you, I do not miss working with, and that's Mike Keenan, who gives credit to you. And I remember him saying one time, he says, Scotty always said, you got to keep the players off guard. You got to keep the players, thinking. So tell us about Mike Keenan, because I know you had him in Rochester as the farm team of Buffalo.
The reason that we got him is Roger Neilson again. See, Roger Neilson, being from Toronto, and we were looking for a coach in our farm team in Rochester. And Roger said, I have the guy for you, and I want you to interview him. So I brought Mike in. We had a couple of young players, and we sent Mike along to Rochester. And he all of a sudden, the team clicked, and they won the Calder Cup. But that was Roger Neilson that told me that this guy's going to be a good coach in the American League. And then, of course, Bobby Clark phoned me after he wanted to make changes in Philadelphia. And I said, Bobby, I don't know a lot about him because I was in Buffalo and he's in Rochester. But I know one thing, the players played hard. And he said, well, you need somebody to take over this team. But I kept up with him after he went to Philadelphia. And he got a lot out of certain players, but he just rubbed the other guys. And I still know, I know that his hard work and his desire was always, paramount. And that's why I think Roger knew him from days. And then Roger went to Peterborough after that was his first start in the NHL in the pro ranks, because there was a team run by Montreal, and Roger went there. But I don't know how he ever met Mike Keenan.
Yeah, well, I had some. We had a successful season together, and that's really all that matters. And that's why I hired him, because I thought he could win. And I tell you, your name came up at that point because I said to the owners, well, they weren't the owners, but the guys that, ran the corporation. I said, we got to get a coach of one of these 3 guys. It's got to be Al Arbour, Scotty Bowman, or Mike Keenan. And I said, Scotty Bowman is coaching Pittsburgh. Yeah. Al Arbour's coaching the Islanders, and Mike Keenan just got fired in Chicago. So that's how we ended up getting Mike Keenan.
And Neil, we also, I think it would be, it tweaked my mind or my memory. It probably was 89. It was around 89 when Jack, what's his name from the Rangers?
Jack Diller.
Jack Diller came to Buffalo. Remember?
Yes, with me.
Neil was in one room and I was in the other, and he was going back and forth. And I never had a taste to move my family to New York City. And we were in small little Buffalo. But I remember Neil and we were talking back and forth. And Neil said, well, we should both go. And I said, no, not for me this time, Neil. And then, that's the guy that hired you, wasn't it?
Yeah. That is. And I remember that very well. I've told that story to people too.
What happened to him after the Rangers, though?
He went to Nashville and had a good run in Nashville with the new team when it was brand new.
Was he a good man, Neil? Good man?
Yeah, he was a good man. He was a lawyer. Scotty, when somebody gives me a chance, I thank Jack Diller many times for giving me the chance to be in New York. Wow. And I said, you know what? It's because of you that the Rangers won the cup, because you gave a young guy a chance. And that guy had been, that guy was able to get it done. But I said, had you gone the normal way the Rangers always go and hired some, X this or X that, I said, maybe they never would have won yet. So,
that's good, Neil. Yeah, well, I'm glad we could talk. And
we thank you, Scotty, for being on this. And it's an honor, a privilege.
Thank you.
And it really is. And you are fantastic. I said to Vic earlier, I said, I hope I can have the life that Scotty's having, and not the life you've had, the life you're having now, because I'm getting up there too. But, you are sharp as you were back in 19, whatever it was when I met you. And your memory, is, you must have it.
I keep busy, Neil. I don't sit around. And that's, I think that's what the secret, I'm going to keep going until I fall.
People tell me all the time, and Vic can concur on this, I have a memory like an elephant. I can tell you things from my time, and I want to always be exactly right on. I don't exaggerate. I don't anything. And you're exactly the same, except yours is probably better than mine.
Well, no. Well, thanks a lot, and I'll wait and talk to you soon, Neil. And thanks a lot, Vic. Thanks.
Thank you, Scotty.
Bye. Bye for now.
Neil, Scotty Bowman is going to be 92 in September. And as you had said, he is as sharp as ever. His recall is amazing. And to hear names like Sam Pollock and Frank Selke and Punch Imlach throughout the hour that we spent with him is just, it's walking through the Hall of Fame in and of itself.
Oh, it was fantastic. And I told him off air here that I said, of all the podcasts we've done, that might be my favorite one because, his recall is better than anybody we've ever talked to. And I think I got good recall. He's amazing, just amazing.
It was off the charts. I got a funny story to share with you before we sign off. And I told Scotty off camera the first time that I'd met him, and this was one of our human sides, probably sometime in the infancy of our podcast when I had introduced myself to him. I wanted to run some statistical data past him because that's where I was breaking in the field, and I wasn't dressed really appropriately, let's say. And I got in the elevator with him and he was very cordial. And his assistant, Jimmy Roberts, took a look at me and says, you're going to have to dress a lot better if you're going to make it in the industry. Well, fast forward, my first ever event with ESPN was Rendezvous 1987. And I have a photo somewhere of me sitting in the stands of Le Colisée in Quebec City, taking notes of lines and whatnot, and a row behind me, sitting over my shoulder, chin jutted out and just taking it all in, Scotty Bowman.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, he goes so far back, and you know how we love to talk about Original Six, although he didn't coach Original Six, but boy, he coached Original 12. I mean, he coached the Blues' very first hockey game. So, anyway, I hope the listeners get as much fun out of that one as I did.
It's a great way to kick off our latest franchise, the NHL Wraparound Hockey Hall of Fame edition. Please remember, subscribe, like us. We're on all podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Our new website is almost ready to be launched. So a lot to look forward to as we go through September. Training camp is coming up, and we will look forward to speaking with you again very, very soon. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.